Two keynotes this afternoon before we break off back into our other panel sessions. The first is from Kris Faafoi, Insurance Council of New Zealand. He joined the Insurance Council of New Zealand, Te Kahua Inihua o Aotearoa's Chief Executive in April 2024. You may remember him from previous jobs such as Member of Parliament and Cabinet Minister, and looking even further back than that, he was a journalist, including at TVNZ and the BBC. He has had a huge range of experiences and responsibilities, including being Minister of Justice, Immigration, Commerce, Consumer Affairs and Broadcasting and Media. He now brings all of that wealth of experience to bear as his role as the head of the Insurance Council. Let us now welcome Kris Faafoi. Kia ora, Kris. Kia ora. Get a little curtsy.
Thank you, Te Reira. Kia ora, ngā mihi nui ki koutou katoa. Ki te atua, tēnā koe, ki te papatunuku, tēnā koe, ki te whare, tēnā koe, ki te hunga mate, ki te hunga ora, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Can I also thank Gillian for the invitation to be here at the Stormwater Conference. I just want to make a really big disclaimer, because that's what insurers do at the beginning, that I'm not a technical expert, I'm not a hydrologist, but insurers are very interested in what water does, especially because we're seeing the frequency and severity of climate-related events increase. What the Insurance Council has been tasked by our members, the general insurers, and particularly by our board, the chief executives of some of the biggest insurers in the country, is to make sure that we're playing a bigger role and a more proactive role to ensure that the kinds of things that I think you're doing technically, and also that you're proposing that we have been doing for some time to make our communities more resilient, to protect our communities, should be being done amongst a raft of other things and difficult conversations that we have to have amongst New Zealand, to make sure that in insurers' interests that we're reducing risk. That's important, but also importantly for our members that we're protecting communities in New Zealand. And you all have recent experience, whether it be a relatively small event in the last month or in the last 18 months, of large climate-related events that are continuing to cause issues, not just for the insurance sector, but also for the long-term future of some of communities in and around New Zealand. So we're having a bit of a reset in terms of our priorities within the ICNZ. Now, I've got this remote and hopefully I can use it. But we did a stakeholder survey when I became the chief executive 12 months ago, and not many people actually knew what ICNZ does. So I want to start with the absolute basics. We have 22 members, all the way from the top of the big members, IAG, Suncorp, all the household brands you will know, all the way down to some of the smaller members that we have that just kind of do very discrete lines of insurance. Our members cover about 95% of the general insurance market. We don't do health and life insurance. That's the other industry organisation. And conservatively, our members protect about $2 trillion worth of assets. The Reserve Bank put a stress test report out last week and said that there are around $2 trillion worth of just property alone. So I think that figure is quite conservative. Our aim is to make sure that we increase the resilience of New Zealand, and that we reduce risk in New Zealand. And again, I just want to stress how important the work that you do is a component of that. The figure on the far left of that is a combined ratio, which is the profitability of our sector. Over the last 4 years, that's the average. The closer that number gets to 100, we get close to breaking even. Our members are commercial, so they have to make a profit in order to make sure that when big events happen, they can continue to pay out. In 2023, they paid out $3.8 billion in settlements just for those two events around the Auckland Anniversary Weekend floods and also Cyclone Gabrielle. Last year, there were $3.6 billion of claims and settlements. As I said, we've got 22 members and about 8,500 people working in our sector. We put our annual report out last month, and that $3.6 billion figure is about a normal year. This is what weather-related events have looked like for the last kind of roughly 50 years. You see, it was all relatively kind of normal until 2023 came about. We pay out about somewhere between $250 and $350 million in settlement claims per year for weather-related events. And then 2023 came along, and as I say, close to $4 billion was paid out for 2 events in the space of a month. So, as you can imagine, that was a shock to not just our members, but to the reinsurers, the insurers who insure our members, all based predominantly in Europe. So we need to, in the long term, give them confidence that we are still a good place to send our insurance, their insurance and their reinsurance. So again, our story about what New Zealand is doing to reduce risk around the country, not just from flood activity, but also to seismic activity, is really important for them to continue to have that confidence in our market. They do. I think Simon Watts is going to be here later this week. We took him to the UK last year to tell that New Zealand Inc. story, to talk about the adaptation framework that he's working up, the work that he hopes to have as a component of that framework, just so those reinsurers know that, yes, that happened, but in plain English, we're onto it. And again, this kind of goes back to the core work of this room to make sure that if there is flood mitigation in some areas of the likes of what's happening in Wairoa, if there's a public conversation that should be happening of the likes of South Dunedin, New Zealand is actually advancing those conversations. We've got technical experts saying this is what it should be, and it will protect New Zealand's communities. Again, from the perspective of the insurance sector, so insurance can be affordable and available for the future. So, 2025 so far. We've had a tornado up north. Anyone from up north here? Yep, so you kind of know what's been going on recently. And we had Cyclone Taman in the last month. We had the extreme wind, which I received in Wellington, and the flooding a little bit further south in Canterbury in the Selwyn district. We haven't got a clear figure on what those will cost in terms of claim settlements, but if anything reaches a threshold of $5 million and above likely claim settlements, we have to start gathering those stats. All of those 3 events will easily meet that threshold and probably well exceed it. So I think, and as you're probably picking up, these things seem to be happening more often. They seem to be impacting a wider range of people, and the kind of meta message from the insurance sector is, yes, from an insurance perspective, we want to make sure our product is still available, but also in the best interests of New Zealand long term, we can't continue to be having these events without having built some resilience into our communities. And I think there's a lot more public scrutiny on these events too. I'm not going to get into the details of it because some of it is involved in court cases, but obviously we've got some public questions about what happened in Wairoa and more recently around Little River and what councils should or shouldn't do. But I think the big question from the insurance sector is what can we do proactively to make sure we're reducing that risk? And again, these are conversations that the insurance sector wants to make sure that we're being proactive on. I am going to say something that's going to go right up to the line on that legal activity. We're not party to it at the Insurance Council. But we think it is right to make sure we're having difficult conversations, but also that we have to work with local councils at the same time. That can be a difficult situation to be in, but we have to also make sure that when our reinsurers are asking what's going on in a particular area, if we don't think something happened or maintenance and management wasn't quite there, then we are asking the right questions. But in the long term, kind of trying to do a sprint and a marathon here, we also have to work with central government and local government to make sure that we're doing all that we can to make sure we're reducing risk and increasing the resilience of communities around the country. So the key challenges for our organisation at RCNZ is making sure that insurance is affordable and available. I know you're here for the Stormwater conference, but you've probably all got insurance as well, and you'll probably look at me going, yes, Kris, keep insurance affordable and available. So that's a big issue for our insurers and our members, so we're trying all we can, whether it's in the regulatory space, whether it's in the commercial space, to make sure we're running down our costs as much as we can. The graph on the left, on the right-hand side of that slide, is the makeup of the $100 makeup of a typical house insurance premium. As you will see, I think the green, sorry, my eyes are really bad. On the left-hand side of that, you'll see that the Natural Hazards Commission levy makes up about 24% of a levy. GST is 13% of a levy. The fire service levy is about 5%. So roughly about 40% of what you pay per $100 of your house insurance actually doesn't go to insurers. And that's not some plea for sympathy for the insurance sector. It means we're trying as much as we can behind the scenes to keep those regulatory costs down so the charges that you get every year are reasonable and affordable, and that's a big challenge that we've got going ahead. And we also need to make sure that we're working with regulators to make sure that the challenge of resilience and reducing risk can be dealt with. We're very much submitting hard on RMA changes to make sure that we stop building in stupid places, and that if we have built in stupid places, the kinds of work that you guys do every day in your day-to-day lives can be instituted. The big challenge there is making sure you've got the framework to do that and money. And that's the billions of dollar question. But again, I think the insurance sector is pushing hard to make sure that we are asking those questions, because according to the report that I think Sir Jerry Mataparai put out earlier this year, if we spend $1 proactively, it can save us about somewhere between $4 to $12 in recovery. I was part of a government. There have been previous other governments that aren't acting proactively. The insurance sector wants to make sure that we're kind of biting the bullet on this. Some of the infrastructure work that needs to get done gets done. The investment that needs to happen happens. And again, some of the very difficult conversations about the futures of some communities actually happen. Again, quite blatantly, the insurance sector doesn't want to be the bad guy in all of this and say, this is your insurance premium, and therefore this is some kind of judgment on the future of a community. If that has to happen, then we'll be part of that conversation. But we also think there are some things that we can do proactively to make sure that New Zealand communities can continue to have insurance and can continue to enjoy the lifestyle or the place where they are. There are some difficult conversations to come, but the insurance sector is willing to be a bit of a catalyst in some of those now with the reset agenda that our board has given us. Again, sorry, can't work this, I'm going the wrong way. Radar said I couldn't work this. Right, so our priorities are affordable and accessible insurance, resilience, risk reduction, and regulatory settings that keep our sector enduring. Now, we had our conference in March this year, and the most entertaining panel of the conference was our climate conference, and we had former Climate Minister James Shaw as part of that, and you may or may not know that he put together an adaptation plan which hasn't necessarily been implemented, but his comments at that conference were quite revealing, and I think also show the challenge that we've got as a sector to try and make sure that these kinds of things are happening. Hopefully the technology works.
It doesn't matter who's in charge, central government is not on top of this. I consider myself a friend of Simon Watt's. I disagree with most of the stuff he's doing. That doesn't matter. What matters is that the agencies who are responsible for developing this framework have been going round and round in circles for years and years and years and failing to deliver anything approaching an adequate framework like we need. The insurance industry will do the heavy lifting regardless of what central government does.
That I want to make there, the first one is we are prepared to do some heavy lifting. Because of what happened in 2023 and the costs involved, and because we've actually been saying it for some time, New Zealand knows what's going to happen. The private sector keeps paying out for what is happening, and the future insurability of New Zealand is going to be a real big challenge if we don't actually do something. It's going to hurt you in the pocket as consumers, and it's going to hurt the Crown in terms of compensation every time an event happens, and we actually have an opportunity to do something proactively. The other point I would like to make is that there is some work around an adaptation framework being done. Minister Watts will probably go into that on Thursday morning, and I just want to say that we are working with the government behind the scenes. I can't say any more than that, but we are happy about the progress that is being made, and I think the first initial steps are the important steps in order for all the stakeholders that are involved in this, whether it be insurers, local government, central government, banks, communities, infrastructure providers, to understand the big challenge and quantify that, and then actually start eating parts of the elephant a bite at a time. We do have a challenge because, again, it's a marathon and a sprint. We're seeing some fruits of positive activity. Again, I want to acknowledge some of the work that Lawrence Yule is doing in Wairoa to make that community have a long-term future, and also some of the useful thinking activity that we've seen out of some projects out of the likes of South Dunedin. But we're going to have to see a lot more activity and urgency in order to make sure that we meet the challenge of climate change and the severity and the frequency of some of those events. I've got another clip. A little bit. On the same panel was the Chief Executive of IAG, State, AMI, you know the brands, and our President, Amanda Whiting. Also on that panel was Ben Callagher, who's the Chief Risk Officer of ANZ, biggest bank. And also on that panel was Michael Stiasny, who some of you may know, but is also the Chair of Tower Insurance. They were all asked about, what is the most important thing to make sure we can keep insurance sustainable. And I think this little interaction of a couple of minutes quite succinctly talks about the challenge / opportunity that New Zealand has in the insurance space and resilience.
So what's it going to take to stop houses being built in floodplains?
The simplest answer, and this is I think where we will be heading, is that insurance won't be available. And I think that is the first place that we could start as an industry, because if you think about it, there's not someone already there. We just need to get in really early before development actually starts and make very public statements that this is not an insurable piece of land if you build here.
And the writing's on the wall anyway. I mean, there is some warning around that. Ben, what do we do?
In very simple terms, if they can't get insurance, we won't lend. So it's got a truck and trailer. And that's why it's important that we're joined at the hip, because we can help with those conversations.
Aren't we fooling ourselves a bit? The reason why it's being built on a floodplain is it's to the lower end of the market. The lower end of the market, unfortunately, is going to be taken to the cleaners by the developer. Already with the council in tow, they will come up with some form of mechanism that provides comfort, albeit I don't think it'll be real, and we will still be sitting there saying we're not going to do anything there, no bank, no insurance, but it will still happen. So James is right, it requires the government to do something bold, and we've just learned they don't do that unless we push them to it.
So we won't necessarily push, I think we'll work with the government, obviously, but there is a consumer and commercial reality if nothing were to happen. And I think when we've got a housing challenge, people need places to live, that we're only exacerbating kind of generational problems if we continue to build and make decisions and planning decisions in the way that we have continued to do that for generations. And again, I think the work that this group does in terms of the planning and execution of infrastructure can make the development happen. We just need to be much more proactive in thinking ahead of how we keep new development safe and also how we make water move in different ways for existing communities. Again, I'm no technician, but we really need this work to happen. I think over the last 20 years, we've spent about the equivalent of 4% of GDP responding to natural events over the years. And as Minister Watts said at our conference, that can't happen for much longer.
$9 billion was the cost of Cyclone Gabrielle, $14.5 billion of asset damage, and insurance claims were around $3.5 billion. We cannot financially sustain that degree of expenditure and loss going forward in the future, because what we know is that the severity and the intensity of those events will increase, and so we need to work out how we're going to operate, and importantly how we're going to operate in the future in an enduring manner to deal with this.
We do need some cross-party cooperation on this, and to again give Minister Watts due credit. The work that he's doing behind the scenes has been shared, and I think has the rough support of parties around the House. And from the insurance perspective, and hopefully from your perspective, that means whatever pipeline or decisions that come out of that work will be enduring, we hope, because it needs to be, because the work that comes out of it will be generational. So New Zealand, according to Lloyd's, is the second riskiest country in the world, and since Christchurch, we've paid about $10 billion for the 4 largest events since 2012. This last factoid isn't mine. I need to credit it to the Infrastructure Commission, but there is roughly $300 billion worth of infrastructure out there, and I would say a lot of it is prone to flooding. Half of it's owned by the Crown, so they've got some skin in the game, and the rest is owned by local councils and the private sector. So protecting a lot of this infrastructure, again, in the long term, will help us make sure that if there is an event, the recovery is as swift and as painless as possible. I'm not sure if you can see this, but I just want to talk here about the likes of works that I've spoken about in South Dunedin and Wairoa, and encourage more of that to happen. We're trying to make sure that we've got our radar around the country about where there are good examples of the public conversation happening in the resilience and infrastructure space, and trying to be more proactive about that. And also trying to have our intelligence and our radar out about where bad things are happening. So recently sorry if there's anyone here from Napier, we submitted to the long-term plan to Napier around some development that was going to happen again in areas that were flood-prone. I think it was Greenfields areas, so we really should be pushing hard to make sure that the insurance voice is in that. And you may have heard Amanda Whiting saying we actually need to be more proactive in some of these planning discussions. Insurance usually turns up after the thing has been built. But we actually want insurance to be there and be a question as things are being dreamt of and developed. Because if we say no, and as you saw what the bank said, then some of these things can be stopped before they end up becoming a problem, not necessarily for the developer, but for people who own these houses and for insurance companies and councils after the fact. So again, stopping development in high-risk places, protecting and making sure we can encourage existing communities and enhancing readiness for recovery are kind of the 3 pillars of what we're trying to do in terms of a resilience work, and that is coming together nicely. And I'm not sure if this has necessarily been a strength of ours in the past, but we also want to make sure that the insurance sector is kind of being a catalyst and a leader for the New Zealand Inc. approach. Again, I think we've been there after the fact. Now we want to make sure that we're kind of leading some of the conversations and being there at the beginning of conversations to proactively make sure that kind of clever decisions are being made in terms of planning. We're speaking to the government around the climate adaptation framework. We're speaking to the government and the Reserve Bank about how we get capital flows in to pay for some of the infrastructure that we think should be built, and supporting that effort too. And as I think you were speaking here, it's not just about hard concrete. What are some of the nature-based solutions that our insurers are open to making sure that if it is built, then what the kind of necessary reaction from insurers are around premiums as well. So my kind of last kind of call to action really is that the adaptation challenge for us is actually an opportunity to light a fire to protect communities. And I kind of mentioned it before, you talk about moving water in different ways, and that can actually be a very, very positive thing for not just insurance, but for the future of a lot of our communities. We are looking for other willing participants in the work that we're doing in this advocacy space, but you also know that because of what happened last week for the people of the Selwyn Huts and Little River, that the clock is ticking, so that there is some urgency. And again, as you heard from our President, there will be a reflection in premiums if things don't happen relatively soon, because that's just the reality of what some of our reinsurers will ask of us, but also we price risk. And if things are going to happen more often and things are going to be more severe, but there's nothing to mitigate that, then it just becomes riskier for communities, and there'll be a market-led solution, as the government calls it, and we'd prefer that we get ahead of that. And as you know, doing nothing will be more expensive. So can I thank you for the work that you're doing. I think you've probably been onto this longer than anyone else because you understand what water does and the risk that it poses. But there's also an opportunity now for us to get ahead of this thing, not just to keep insurance affordable, but to make sure that we're protecting communities. I think I've got about 5 minutes left, so I might get radar.
Yeah,
ask a few questions, but thank you for the invitation.
Round of applause for Kris, brilliant. We've got a couple of minutes for questions. If anyone is standing at the back, there are more chairs here. Throw your hands up. Standard procedures, name, organisation. We'll see if we can't whip through them nice and quickly.
Yeah, my name is Yasin Kokerpov from Technos Consultants, Auckland. So I have a question. In your opinion, what would include like 3 major proactive engagements from your council in this space? And supplementary question, have you ever made submission to, say, unitary plan change or any other district plan change?
So yes, we have, and we're hoping to do more of that. To answer your second question first, if there are developments that are on the books or kind of wider plans by councils in areas that have elevated natural hazard risk, then we're going to be there saying what the insurance perspective is on that. There's a harsh reality on that, and one of the things that we want to do is have a better relationship with developers to understand, what we can do in that space. I think I might just reiterate, insurance has always been at the end of the chain. We think it now has to be at the beginning of the chain, so we're not looking to stop developments. What are we doing to make sure that there is, we're reducing the natural hazard risk in an area to the point where we'll be able to happily insure that and people can make the investment and the development might go ahead. There might be some developments that we just say we'd never cover that. And our industry wants to be more bold. I think maybe in the past we would have said, yep, we'll do it because there's competition, but I think they're going to take a lot more holistic approach to that. And we did, as I say, we did submit to the Napier City Council long-term planning. The one thing that we want to make sure is a priority for us is being part of that national adaptation work that Minister Watts is leading, because we actually think that there needs to be some bold decisions in there. And I think, I know there are councils in the room, to give protections to the councils to make some decisions that don't see them locked up in legal activity with developers, so then long-term decisions can be made and they have some certainty about what kind of planning future they have for their communities.
I could take one more very quick question. Who shall I go to? Thank you. All right. Super quick question. And Kris, I know you can do a very excellent live cross. Nice succinct answer.
Thank you.
Kia ora, Kris. Thanks heaps. Emily Lane from Niwa. As one of the maybe it was Michael Stivney said, it's the renters who are going to end up, the poor end of the market that's going to end up in these places. Is there anything that insurance can do about that? Because, that's a little bit trickier because it's not directly the people who are renting it who are billing it.
So the first thing I think we can do is around just kind of pure premium pressure. I put that slide up just to show, 46% of a premium for a house actually isn't controlled by us. We've been banging on about that for a long time because no one wants levies on their product. But I think in the future we seriously have to look at that, because if people are either going to under-insure or not insure, then that just shifts the liability from a private insurer to the Crown. So we're going to push hard on those kinds of things around accessibility. And I think, and I can't speak too much about it because our members have to do their own work around products, I think what they're doing in the product space will also have to be, there'll have to be some innovation just to make sure that people can afford some form of insurance. There is, and it's in the very early days, the likes of parametric cover. I'm not sure if you know what that is, but you can insure, it's usually for a large organisation like they have a lot in the Pacific or iwi here in New Zealand. If an event happens that meets a threshold, there's just an automatic payout. So if there were, so some iwi, say if there's a flood event and so much rain falls out and causes enough damage, a payout goes to them. So those who are within that iwi, who might not necessarily be able to afford insurance themselves, at least will have a pool of money. And I think the more innovation around those kinds of products will actually help in the future for those who aren't necessarily being able to meet the challenge of an insurance premium themselves.
Excellent. Round of applause for Kris Faafoi.